In 1997, the book Impostures intellectuelles was published in France. Written by Alan Sokal and Jean Bricmont, this text is a critique of the use of scientific and mathematical vocabulary by postmodern philosophers. Here is an example of the kind of language that can be used, taken from the book L'étourdi by Jacques Lacan, written in 1973. Everything can be kept developing around what I assert about the logical correlation of two formulas, which, mathematically written, for all x phi of x and it exists an x such that phi of x bar are thus stated. The first one, for all x phi of x, is satisfied. This, translated in the analytic discourse, whose bit is to make sense, means that all subject in itself, as this is what is at stake in this discourse, enters into the phallic function in order to solve the absence of sexual intercourse. I must now mention the fact that Lacan's theories had some success in their time. Psychoanalysis, although it has been criticized since its invention by Freud in the 20s, still has many followers in France and the rest of the world. So this example, a bit of a caricature, tells us something about the way psychological science has been considered. For what I find the most extraordinary is the fact that this work was published in the same decade that Stephen Hawking published his first paper on the theory of black holes, which became a reference in the study of these objects. In fact, the apparent goal of these two researchers is much the same: to provide a theoretical background for understanding and clarifying speculations about mysterious and invisible objects such as black holes or unconscious. Both Lacan and Hawkins are theorists, after all, although Hawkins seems to be a bit more comfortable with mathematical concepts. The question I ask myself then is, why is there still today such a gap in the treatment of psychology and natural sciences? Is it impossible to build a scientific theory of mind? Perhaps Lacan's approach is the best we had at that time. I don't think so. In other words, I don't think that understanding with reasonable certainty how psychopathologies occur is fundamentally more difficult than understanding, say, black holes. A priori, we don't know whether or not it is possible to reach that level of understanding. Biology is developing at an incredible rate these days, probably in part because of the huge amounts of money spent on medical research. However, psychology is a science that is still much less advanced than, for example, oncology or neurology. Because it started its development very recently, there are many areas about which we know almost nothing with certainty. There is a real lack of studies on many pathologies like narcissism, for example. But does this mean that narcissism is much more difficult to understand than depression, a pathology about which we know a lot? The reason I am convinced is social and has something to do with the overall perception of psychology, even among researchers. Perhaps because of the persuasiveness of psychoanalytic theories at a time when the mind was an inaccessible entity, many psychologists today are still convinced that the discipline of Freud and Jung has some reliability, especially because many psychologists claim that they see the effect of transference and countertransference interpretation. This also may have something to do with confirmation bias and the maturity of the discipline. Citing Daniele Fanelli's 2010 study, Positive Results Increase Down the Hierarchy of the Science, which analyzes the occurrence of positive results in studies within the disciplines considered by Auguste Comte. Controlling for observed differences between pure and applied disciplines and between papers testing one or more hypotheses, the odds of reporting a positive results were about 5 times higher among papers in the discipline of psychology or the discipline of psychiatry and economics and business compared to the space sciences. 2.3 times higher in the social sciences compared to the physical sciences. So, psychologists are in general more optimistic than researchers from other sciences field. Let's jump to the article's conclusions. Prior knowledge and beliefs could be involved. Experimental psychologists are more likely to have experienced many personal observations than astronomers. The depth of hypothesis tested also plays a role. Physicists take more risk in testing hypotheses that are not going to be true. Finally speaks of testing phenomenological theories, supposedly easier to corroborate than mechanistic theories. So, I think psychology is a very good example of the effect of the social context in the act of doing science, even if this impact is sometimes difficult to recognize in every area of science. Confirmation bias, publication bias, and the ethical right to conduct further experiments are a big obstacle. It is important to remember that we are human after all.